The front gate hung open like a broken promise. That was the first thing David Harrison noticed as he pulled his silver BMW into the circular driveway of their Tudor-style home in Willowbrook Heights. After 3 days of lies wrapped in silk sheets and champagne kisses, he'd returned to find his world dismantled with surgical precision. No screaming, no broken dishes, just the devastating quiet of a woman who had finally stopped fighting for a love that no longer fought back. David cut the engine and sat in the leather seat, staring at the house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. The Christmas wreaths still adorned the double doors, their red velvet ribbons catching the pale December light, but something fundamental had shifted. The warmth that usually spilled from the windows was absent. No soft glow from the reading lamps. No flicker of the fireplace where Rachel would curl up with her evening tea. No gentle hum of the baby monitor broadcasting soft coos from upstairs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Just silence. Cold, deliberate silence that made his skin crawl. He climbed out of the car slowly, his expensive Italian shoes crunching against the frost-covered gravel. The air bit at his cheeks, sharp and unforgiving, carrying the scent of pine and the distant promise of snow. Christmas Eve had passed without him. Christmas Day too. He'd told Rachel he was in Portland, closing a merger that couldn't wait. She believed him because she always believed him. Even when the lies had grown so elaborate, he sometimes forgot which version of the truth he'd told her. But Portland hadn't seen David Harrison this Christmas. Neither had any boardroom or client dinner. Instead, he'd been 3 hours south in Coastal Bay, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets with Natalie Pierce, a marketing consultant with emerald eyes and a laugh that made him forget he was a father of twin 6-month-old daughters. The front door was unlocked. It swung open with a soft whisper, revealing the foyer that Rachel had decorated with her characteristic attention to detail. Garland wound around the banister, twinkling lights casting dancing shadows on the cream-colored walls. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, except for one glaring absence: life. Rachel! His voice echoed through the house, hollow and uncertain. "Honey, I'm home." No answer. Not even the sound of movement upstairs. David dropped his overnight bag by the mahogany console and walked deeper into the house. The living room was immaculate, as always. Rachel's throw pillows arranged precisely on the ivory sofa. Her favorite candles lined up on the coffee table, their wicks dark and cold. Even her reading glasses sat folded neatly beside the latest novel she'd been working through, a bookmark tucked exactly halfway through. But it was what sat propped against the silver picture frame on the side table that made his blood turn to ice water. An envelope. Cream-colored paper, his name written across it in Rachel's careful script. The same handwriting that had filled love notes tucked into his briefcase during their early years, that had signed birthday cards with "Forever Yours," that had penned grocery lists full of organic baby food and vitamins. His hands trembled as he tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper with words that hit him like a physical blow. "David, by the time you read this, Emma and Sophie will be somewhere safe. We won't be coming home. I know about Coastal Bay. I know about Natalie. I know about all the late nights that weren't really work and all the business trips that weren't really business. Don't look for us. Don't call. Use the time to figure out who you want to be when the lies stop working. R." The letter slipped from his fingers, floating to the hardwood floor like a white flag of surrender. He stood there, stunned, his mind struggling to process what he was reading. She knew. Somehow, Rachel knew everything. His legs carried him upstairs without conscious thought, drawn by some desperate hope that this was all an elaborate misunderstanding. Maybe she'd taken the twins to her sister's for a surprise visit. Maybe she'd left early for the family gathering they'd planned for New Year's. Maybe the letter was some kind of test, a cry for attention that could be smoothed over with flowers and promises. But the nursery told a different story entirely. 2 cribs stood empty, their pink and yellow bedding gone. The rocking chair where Rachel spent countless midnight hours feeding Emma and Sophie sat vacant, no longer surrounded by the controlled chaos of bottles and burp cloths and tiny socks that somehow always went missing. Sophie's favorite stuffed bunny, the one she couldn't sleep without, was nowhere to be found. Neither was Emma's musical mobile that played Brahms' lullaby. David's knees buckled. He gripped the doorframe, his breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a temporary separation. This was an execution. Clean, calculated, and absolute. He stumbled to their bedroom, hoping against hope to find some sign that she was coming back. But Rachel's side of the walk-in closet was half empty. Her jewelry box sat open and bare except for the wedding ring that caught the light from the window, the 2-carat princess cut he'd surprised her with on their 5th anniversary, now sitting abandoned like everything else he'd given her. The bathroom counter was clear of her skincare routine, her prescription bottles, her favorite perfume that always lingered on her pillow. She'd taken only what she needed, leaving behind everything that connected her to the life they'd built together. David sank onto the edge of their California king bed, the same bed where Emma and Sophie had been conceived during a romantic weekend getaway to wine country. The same bed where Rachel had whispered her fears about becoming a mother, where he'd held her through morning sickness and midnight cravings, where he'd promised her that their family would be his priority. Promises he'd broken with methodical precision over the past year. His phone buzzed. For one wild moment, he thought it might be Rachel, calling to tell him where she was, to give him a chance to explain or beg or grovel. But it was Natalie, her name lighting up the screen with a text that made him sick. Missing you already. When can we do this again? Kiss Mark. He turned the phone face down and buried his head in his hands. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour, their bronze voices carrying across Willowbrook Heights like a funeral dirge. Christmas was over. His family was gone. And David Harrison was finally alone with the choices he'd made. The house that had once been filled with laughter and baby giggles and the soft murmur of Rachel humming while she folded laundry now felt like a tomb. A monument to everything he'd thrown away for stolen moments and the thrill of something new. He'd returned expecting forgiveness he'd never asked for, expecting a wife who would smile and welcome him home despite the perfume on his clothes and the lies on his lips. Instead, he'd found justice. Silent, devastating justice that left him sitting in the wreckage of his own making, finally understanding that some betrayals don't end with tears and arguments. Sometimes they end with the simple, terrible sound of a door closing forever. David's hands shook as he reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts with desperate urgency. Rachel's sister. That had to be it. Lindsay would know where they'd gone, would tell him this was all some elaborate misunderstanding that could be fixed with the right words and enough groveling. The phone rang 3 times before Lindsay's voice came through, cautious and cold. David. Lindsay, thank God. Where is she? Where are Rachel and the girls? The words tumbled out of him, raw and panicked. A long pause. Too long. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. His voice cracked. She's gone. They're all gone. There's a note she knows about. She knows things. You have to tell me where they are. David. Lindsay's tone was ice. Even if I knew, which I don't, why would you think you have the right to that information? The line went dead. David stared at the phone, his reflection caught in the black screen, disheveled hair, stubble, eyes red-rimmed with something between rage and grief. He looked like a stranger. He tried Rachel's mother next. Then her college roommate. Her book club friends. Each call ended the same way, polite deflection that felt more like a coordinated effort than coincidence. They knew. Somehow they all knew, and they'd closed ranks around Rachel like a fortress he'd never be allowed to breach. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Thomas Chen, his business partner and the closest thing he had to a best friend. David answered on the first ring. Tom, I need. Jesus, David, where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. Your assistant said you were in Portland, but the Henley group said you never showed up for the meeting. David's stomach dropped. He'd forgotten entirely about the actual business he was supposed to be conducting while he was busy destroying his personal life. Tom, listen, I need you to. No, you listen. Margaret Henley called me personally. Said it was completely unprofessional for a partner to blow off a multi-million-dollar merger discussion without so much as a phone call. I had to scramble to cover for you, make up some story about a family emergency. Family emergency. The irony would have been laughable if David could remember how to laugh. There was a family emergency, he said quietly. Rachel's gone. She took the girls. The silence on the other end stretched until David wondered if the call had dropped. Then Tom's voice came back, careful and measured. Gone how? She left me. Found out about. David couldn't finish the sentence. Saying it out loud would make it real, would force him to confront the magnitude of what he'd thrown away. About Natalie? The words hit David like a physical blow. How do you? Come on, man. You really think nobody noticed? The mysterious Portland trips that never seemed to involve any actual Portland business? The way you started dressing differently, wearing that expensive cologne? The phone calls you'd taken private. Tom's voice was heavy with disappointment. I kept hoping you'd come to your senses before you blew up your life. David sank back onto the bed, the phone pressed against his ear like a lifeline. She knows everything, Tom. I don't know how, but she knows. And now she's just gone. No forwarding address, no way to reach her. It's like she vanished. Maybe she needed to. What's that supposed to mean? Tom sighed, the sound carrying years of friendship and frustration. David, I watched you check out of your marriage months ago. You missed Emma's first smile because you were in Coastal Bay. You forgot Sophie's 6-month checkup because you were planning another weekend away. Rachel stopped talking about you at company events. When people asked how you were doing, she'd just smile and change the subject. Each word was a knife between David's ribs, cutting deeper because he recognized the truth in them. He'd been so focused on the thrill of his double life that he'd missed the slow death of his real one. She never said anything to me, David protested weakly. What was she supposed to say? Hey honey, I know you're having an affair, could you please stop? Tom's voice was sharp now. The woman had more dignity than that. She knew if she had to ask, it was already over. David stood and walked to the window, staring out at the neighborhood where he'd planned to raise his daughters. Mrs. Hoffman next door was bringing in her mail, moving carefully across the icy walkway. The Washingtons' house displayed their traditional elaborate Christmas light show. Normal people living normal lives, probably wondering where the Harrison family had disappeared to. I need to find them, Tom. No, you need to figure out why you destroyed your family before you go chasing after them. I love her. The words felt hollow even as he said them. You love the idea of her. You love having her there to come home to when your excitement elsewhere wore thin. But if you really loved Rachel, if you really loved those babies, you wouldn't have been able to walk away from them for someone else. David's reflection stared back at him from the window, superimposed over the winter landscape like a ghost haunting his former life. He looked like his father, the same weak jawline, the same eyes that couldn't quite meet their own gaze. His father, who'd walked out when David was 12, chasing a secretary named Brenda to Phoenix and leaving behind a wife who never quite recovered from the betrayal. The realization hit him like cold water. He'd become the man he'd spent his childhood hating. Tom, he said quietly, what if I can't fix this? Then you learn to live with it. You figure out how to be the man your daughters deserve, even if their mother can't stand the sight of you. You stop making excuses and start making amends, even if nobody's around to see it. After Tom hung up, David found himself walking through the house like a museum visitor, seeing everything with new eyes. Rachel's coffee mug, still in the sink from whatever morning she decided she was done waiting for him to come home. The twins' high chairs, still positioned by the kitchen island where Rachel would feed them while she had her breakfast, multitasking with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to do everything alone. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a pineapple they'd bought on their honeymoon in Hawaii, was a photo from Emma and Sophie's first Christmas morning, just 3 days ago. Rachel sat on the living room floor in her favorite red pajamas, a baby in each arm, all three of them looking at the camera with pure joy. David wasn't in the picture. He'd been the one taking it, he remembered now. Always behind the camera, never in the moment. Always documenting a life he was too distracted to actually live. He pulled the photo from the refrigerator and studied Rachel's face. Her smile was radiant, but now he could see what he'd missed before, the shadows under her eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach them. She'd been beautiful and exhausted and alone, even with him in the room. Especially with him in the room. His phone buzzed with another text from Natalie. "Haven't heard from you since yesterday. Everything okay?" David stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Then he blocked her number entirely. It was the first honest thing he'd done in months, and it felt like pulling off a bandage, sharp and necessary and long overdue. Outside, snow had started to fall, dusting the world in pristine white. A fresh start. A clean slate. But David knew that some stains went deeper than snow could cover, and some damage couldn't be undone with good intentions and regret. Rachel was out there somewhere, probably watching the same snowfall, probably telling Emma and Sophie that Daddy wouldn't be coming home for a while. Maybe not ever. And for the first time since he'd started lying to himself about what he wanted versus what he needed, David understood that she was probably right. The house settled around him with small creaks and sighs, the sounds of a home learning to be empty. Tomorrow, he would have to start figuring out how to live in the wreckage of his own making. But tonight, he would sit with the silence and let it teach him what his marriage had been trying to tell him all along. 4 days earlier, the coffee shop in downtown Willowbrook Heights buzzed with its usual morning energy. Rachel Harrison sat in the corner booth, her laptop open to what appeared to be work emails, but her attention was fixed on her phone screen. The twins were with David's mother for a few precious hours, a rare gift of time that Rachel had planned to use for catching up on her freelance graphic design projects. Instead, she found herself staring at a photograph that made her stomach churn. The image had appeared in her Instagram feed 20 minutes ago, tagged by someone named Jennifer Walsh, a mutual connection from David's firm. It showed the interior of an upscale restaurant in Coastal Bay, all exposed brick and Edison bulb lighting. The photo was meant to showcase the artfully plated seafood, but in the background, reflected in the restaurant's mirror, 2 figures sat intimately close at a candlelit table. One of them was unmistakably her husband. Rachel's hands trembled as she zoomed in on the image. David wore the navy blue shirt she'd bought him for their anniversary, the one he'd claimed was too nice for casual dinners, when she'd suggested he wear it to their own date nights. His hand rested on the table, fingers intertwined with those of a woman with auburn hair and a melodic laugh that seemed to carry even through the silent photograph. The timestamp showed yesterday, December 22nd. The same day David had kissed her goodbye and promised to call from Portland once his meetings wrapped up. Portland was a 4-hour drive north. Coastal Bay was 3 hours south. The opposite direction entirely. Rachel closed her laptop with shaking hands and pulled up her shared calendar with David, a system they'd implemented after the twins were born to coordinate their chaotic schedules. His Portland trip was blocked out in blue. Henderson Group merger discussions, December 22nd to 26th. Back Christmas night. She opened a new browser window and typed Henderson Group Portland into the search bar. The company's website appeared, professional and polished, with a contact page listing their corporate headquarters. Rachel dialed the number with her heart hammering against her ribs. Henderson Group, how may I direct your call? Hi, I'm trying to reach someone about the merger discussions you're having with Harrison and Associates this week. Rachel's voice sounded steadier than she felt. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any meetings scheduled with Harrison and Associates this week. Our offices are closed until January 3rd for the holiday break. The phone slipped from Rachel's hand, clattering onto the coffee shop table. A few nearby patrons glanced over with mild concern, but Rachel barely noticed. The world had tilted sideways, and she was struggling to find her footing in this new reality where her husband's carefully constructed lies were unraveling in real time. She paid for her untouched latte and drove home in a daze, muscle memory navigating the familiar streets while her mind raced through every detail of the past few months. David's sudden interest in working out, the new cologne that appeared in their bathroom, the way he'd started keeping his phone face down during dinner, when he used to scroll through photos of the twins between courses. Back home, David's mother, Patricia, was on the living room floor with Emma and Sophie, making exaggerated faces that sent both babies into fits of giggles. The scene was so normal, so perfect, that Rachel felt like an intruder in her own life. "How did it go, sweetheart?" Patricia looked up with a warm smile. "Get all your work sorted?" Rachel forced a smile. "Yes, very productive. Thank you so much for watching them." "Anytime. These little angels are never any trouble." Patricia gathered her purse and coat. "David called while you were out. Said his meetings are running longer than expected, but he'll definitely be home Christmas night. That man works too hard." After Patricia left, Rachel sat on the couch with Emma on her lap and Sophie playing with blocks on the floor. The house felt different now, like a stage set where she'd been unknowingly performing the role of the happy wife while her husband rewrote their story behind the scenes. She opened her laptop again and typed "Coastal Bay Restaurants" into the search engine. The place from the photo appeared in the results. Meridian Bistro, known for its romantic atmosphere and locally sourced seafood. 5-star reviews praised it as the perfect spot for intimate dinners and ideal for special occasions. Special occasions. While she was home changing diapers and heating bottles, David was creating special occasions with someone else. Rachel picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Maya Rodriguez, her closest friend since college, now a private investigator specializing in corporate fraud. If anyone could help her understand the scope of David's deception, it was Maya. "Rachel, this is a surprise. How are the girls?" "Maya, I need your help." Rachel's voice cracked despite her efforts to stay composed. "I think David is having an affair." A pause. Then Maya's voice, softer now. "Oh, honey, what happened?" Rachel told her everything. The Portland lie, the restaurant photo, the fake meetings. Maya listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy that somehow made everything feel more real and more devastating. "I can look into it for you," Maya said finally. "But Rachel, are you sure you want to know? Sometimes ignorance feels easier than the truth." "I'm already living with the truth," Rachel replied, watching Sophie stack blocks with intense concentration. "I just didn't have proof before. Give me 24 hours. Maya called back the next morning, Christmas Eve, while Rachel was preparing bottles for the twins' afternoon feeding. David had left early for his flight to Portland, kissing her goodbye with what she now recognized as relief rather than affection. "I found her," Maya said without preamble. Natalie Pierce, marketing consultant. Lives in Coastal Bay, works with several firms in the area, including, as of 6 months ago, Harrison and Associates. 6 months. The timeline hit Rachel like a physical blow. 6 months ago, Emma and Sophie had just started sleeping through the night. She'd finally been feeling like herself again after the chaos of early motherhood. She'd even suggested to David that they plan a weekend away together, their first real time alone since the twins were born. He'd said he was too busy with work. "There's more," Maya continued gently. "I checked his credit card statements, the ones linked to your shared account. Meridian Bistro, 3 separate charges over the past 2 months. The Ocean View Inn in Coastal Bay, multiple weekend stays. A jewelry store purchase last week for $800. Rachel's hand went instinctively to her bare neck. No new jewelry had appeared in her life recently. I'm sending you everything I found, Maya said. Screenshots, receipts, timelines. But Rachel, I want you to think carefully about what you're going to do with this information. What do you mean? I mean you have choices. You can confront him, demand explanations, try to work through it. You can pretend you never found out and hope it burns itself out. Or you can decide that you and those babies deserve better than being someone's backup plan. After Maya hung up, Rachel sat in the quiet kitchen, her laptop open to a folder full of evidence that dismantled her marriage with forensic precision. Hotel receipts dated during his supposed business trips. Restaurant charges for romantic dinners he'd never taken her to. Even a florist bill from the day he'd claimed to be in meetings but was apparently buying someone else flowers. She thought about the early days of their relationship, when David would drive 2 hours just to bring her soup when she had the flu. When he'd proposed during a camping trip in the mountains, so nervous his hands shook as he fumbled with the ring. When he'd cried in the hospital delivery room as Emma and Sophie made their entrance into the world, promising them he'd always be there to protect them. Promises felt different when you knew how easily they could be broken. Emma fussed in her high chair, pulling Rachel back to the present. She prepared a bottle and settled into the rocking chair, watching her daughter's eyes flutter closed as she fed. Sophie played contentedly on her blanket nearby, babbling to herself in the mysterious language of babies. This was her life. These moments of quiet joy with her daughters, the satisfaction of building something beautiful and meaningful from the chaos of new parenthood. David had chosen to step outside of this, to treat it as something to escape from rather than something to cherish. As evening approached and the house filled with the warm glow of Christmas lights, Rachel made her decision. She opened her laptop and began typing a list, not of grievances or accusations, but of practical steps. Bank accounts to separate, important documents to gather, custody arrangements to consider. She wasn't going to confront David with tears and demands for explanation. She wasn't going to beg him to choose their family over his fantasy. Instead, she was going to choose herself and her daughters. She was going to show Emma and Sophie what it looked like when someone valued themselves enough to walk away from a situation that diminished their worth. The twins were asleep by the time she finished her planning. The house was quiet, peaceful in the way that only came during the deep hours of Christmas Eve. Rachel walked through each room, seeing it with new eyes, not as the home they'd built together, but as the place she was preparing to leave behind. Tomorrow was Christmas. David would return from his lie-wrapped weekend expecting to slide back into their life as if nothing had happened. He would expect forgiveness he'd never asked for, understanding he'd never earned. Instead, he would find the natural consequence of taking someone's love for granted, its absence. Rachel picked up her phone and texted her sister Lindsay, "Can you help me with something tomorrow? I'll explain when I see you." The response came quickly, "Always. Whatever you need." By Christmas night, David Harrison would discover that some gifts, once lost, could never be unwrapped again. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the Coastal Bay cottage, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floor where Natalie Pierce sat with her laptop, scrolling through vacation rental listings with growing desperation. Her hands shook slightly as she refreshed the browser for the third time in 10 minutes, hoping to find something, anything, available for New Year's week that she could afford on her suddenly uncertain income. 3 days had passed since Christmas morning, when her carefully constructed world had imploded with the efficiency of a controlled demolition. 3 days since she discovered that David Harrison, the man she'd fallen for with the reckless abandon of someone who thought she'd finally found her person, had been living a double life that made her complicit in the destruction of a family she'd never known existed. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now the one planning an escape. Her phone buzzed against the granite countertop, another call from David that she let roll to voicemail. She'd stopped answering after the first dozen, when his explanations had devolved from panicked justifications to desperate pleas that made her stomach turn. The man who'd spent 6 months telling her about his amicable separation and pending divorce had never been separated at all. The twins he'd mentioned in passing as Rachel's children were his own daughters, barely 6 months old. Natalie opened her laptop and stared at the last message she'd received from her sister Carmen in Phoenix. The job offer is still open if you want it. Fresh start, no questions asked. Just say the word. She'd built a life here in Coastal Bay over the past 3 years. A successful consulting practice, a cottage by the water, a routine that had felt like contentment until David had walked into her professional world and turned it upside down. Now everything felt tainted by the knowledge that her happiness had been built on someone else's misery. The doorbell rang, startling her from her brooding. Through the front window, she could see a woman standing on her porch, tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and an expression that managed to be both determined and exhausted. She looked familiar in the way that made Natalie's chest tighten with recognition. This was Rachel Harrison. It had to be. Natalie's first instinct was to pretend she wasn't home, to hide behind the closed door until the woman who had every right to hate her finally gave up and left. But something in Rachel's posture, the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite what had to be devastating circumstances, made Natalie feel even smaller than she already did. She opened the door. Natalie Pierce? Rachel's voice was calm, professional almost, but Natalie could hear the tension underneath. Yes. Natalie's throat felt dry. You're Rachel. I am. Rachel shifted her purse strap on her shoulder. I was hoping we could talk. Woman to woman. Natalie stepped back, gesturing for Rachel to come in. Of course. Please. They sat in the living room, an ocean of uncomfortable silence stretching between them on Natalie's cream-colored sofa. Rachel placed her hands carefully in her lap, her wedding ring catching the morning light. Natalie noticed she was still wearing it, though she couldn't imagine why. I want you to know, Rachel said finally, that I'm not here to yell at you or call you names or make a scene. I'm here because I think we both deserve to understand what really happened. Natalie felt her eyes well up. I'm so sorry. If I had known, if he had told me the truth, I never would have. I believe you. Rachel's response was immediate and somehow made everything worse. David is very good at telling people what they need to hear. He told me you were separated, Natalie said, the words tumbling out in a rush. He said it was mutual, that you were both waiting until after the holidays to tell family. He said you'd agreed it was better for the children if there wasn't any conflict. Rachel's laugh was bitter but not unkind. That sounds like David. Always managing the narrative, always making himself the reasonable one in every story. When did you find out? Natalie asked quietly. Christmas Eve. I saw a photo from the restaurant, you two in the background of someone else's Instagram post. Rachel paused, seeming to gather herself. I hired a private investigator. She found everything. 6 months of lies, hotel receipts, credit card charges. A very thorough double life. Natalie closed her eyes. 6 months. She thought about every dinner, every weekend getaway, every intimate moment that had felt like building something real with someone she was falling in love with. All of it had been stolen time, borrowed from a woman who was home taking care of babies while her husband constructed an elaborate fantasy. The twins, Natalie said. He barely mentioned them. Said they were yours from before, that he was still adjusting to the idea of being a stepfather. Emma and Sophie are 6 months old, Rachel replied. He was in the delivery room when they were born. Cried when he held them for the first time. Promised them he'd always be there to protect them. The words hit Natalie like physical blows. She thought about Christmas Eve, when David had seemed distracted during dinner, checking his phone with what she'd interpreted as work anxiety. He'd been missing his daughter's first Christmas. He'd been missing the most important moments of his family's life to maintain a lie that had made her unknowingly complicit in their destruction. I left him, Rachel said simply. Christmas night. Took the girls and left. I couldn't stay and pretend I didn't know, and I couldn't confront him either. Some betrayals are too big for explanations. Where are you now? Somewhere safe. Rachel's tone made it clear she wouldn't be sharing details, and Natalie didn't blame her. They sat in silence for a moment, two women who'd been manipulated by the same man in different ways, both trying to understand how they'd ended up in this surreal conversation. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said finally. "Anything. Do you hate me?" Rachel considered the question seriously. "I wanted to. It would be easier if I could hate you, blame you for taking something that was mine. But you didn't take anything. David gave it away, piece by piece, choice by choice. You were just there when he decided he didn't want to do the hard work of being married anymore." "I think I was falling in love with him," Natalie admitted, the words feeling strange and shameful. "I think he was falling in love with the idea of being someone else," Rachel replied. "Someone without responsibilities or consequences. Someone who could be charming and attentive because he didn't have to worry about paying bills or changing diapers or staying up all night with sick babies." Natalie thought about the David she'd known, always impeccably dressed, always ready with reservations at expensive restaurants, always available for spontaneous weekend trips. She'd been attracted to his confidence, his success, his apparent ability to prioritize their relationship even with his demanding career. Now she realized that his availability had been a red flag, not a green one. "What will you do now?" Rachel asked. "Leave, probably. My sister has a job opportunity in Phoenix. Clean slate, fresh start." Natalie paused. "What about you?" "I don't know yet. Focus on the girls, figure out custody arrangements, maybe move somewhere new. Build something that's just ours, you know." Rachel stood to leave, and Natalie walked her to the door. On the porch, Rachel turned back one more time. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you're probably a good person who got caught up in someone else's mess. Don't let David's choices make you think less of yourself." Natalie watched Rachel walk to her car, struck by the grace with which the woman carried herself despite having every reason to be bitter and broken. She'd expected anger, accusations, demands for details about the affair. Instead, she'd encountered dignity that somehow made her feel both forgiven and more ashamed than any confrontation could have. As Rachel's car disappeared down the coastal road, Natalie pulled out her phone and typed a message to her sister. "Yes to Phoenix. I need to get out of here as soon as possible." Then she opened a new message and began typing to David. "Don't contact me again. What we had was built on lies, and I won't be part of it anymore. I hope someday you understand what you threw away." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then blocked his number entirely. The cottage felt different now, not like home, but like a place she'd been visiting that no longer welcomed her. Tomorrow she would start packing. By New Year's, she would be gone, leaving behind the life she'd thought she wanted for the chance to build something real. Something that didn't require someone else's family to be broken first. Proceed with Part 5. Without include title, make sure that each part at least 800-1000 words. Write fifth from 10 part of story. Please make sure you don't do any overlapping and rewriting. 9:10 a.m. The law office of Sterling and Associates occupied the second floor of a renovated Victorian mansion in downtown Millfield, its tall windows offering views of the town square where holiday decorations still lingered despite the new year having arrived 3 days ago. Rachel Harrison sat across from attorney Patricia Sterling, her hands folded carefully in her lap as she watched the older woman review the documents spread across the mahogany desk. Emma gurgled contentedly in her carrier beside Rachel's chair, while Sophie had fallen asleep during the drive over, her tiny fist curled against her cheek. Rachel had learned to conduct business around the twin schedules, a skill that had become second nature since leaving Willowbrook Heights a week and a half ago. "This is quite comprehensive," Patricia said, adjusting her reading glasses. "You've documented everything: credit card statements, hotel receipts, the private investigator's findings. It paints a clear picture of deception and abandonment of family responsibilities." Rachel nodded, feeling strangely detached from the evidence of her husband's betrayal. The shock had worn off, replaced by a practical determination to protect her daughter's future. What are my options for custody? Patricia leaned back in her leather chair, her expression thoughtful. Given the circumstances, you have a strong case for primary custody with supervised visitation initially. The court will want to see evidence that Mr. Harrison can be a stable, reliable presence in the children's lives before granting unsupervised access. He's been calling constantly, Rachel said quietly. Leaving voicemails, sending texts. He wants to know where we are, wants to work things out. She used air quotes around the phrase, unable to hide her bitterness. Has he made any threats? Anything that could be construed as harassment? No, nothing like that. He sounds desperate. Broken, maybe. But I don't trust it. David is very good at performing emotions when he needs something. Patricia made a note on her legal pad. We'll file for emergency temporary custody today, along with a restraining order that prevents him from attempting to locate you or the children until formal proceedings begin. You have the right to establish a safe environment for your daughters. Through the window, Rachel could see people going about their normal Thursday afternoon routines, picking up dry cleaning, meeting friends for coffee, living lives that hadn't been dismantled by betrayal. She envied them their ordinary problems and predictable schedules. There's something else, Rachel said, pulling a folded paper from her purse. He's been trying to reach my family, my friends. My sister Lindsay got 3 calls yesterday. He told her I was having some kind of breakdown, that I'd taken the children during a mental health crisis. Patricia's eyebrows rose sharply. He's attempting to control the narrative, make you appear unstable. It's a common tactic, unfortunately. We'll address that in our filing as well. Rachel felt a surge of anger, the first real emotion she'd allowed herself to feel in days. I've never been more clear-headed in my life. Walking away from him was the sanest thing I've ever done. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I believe you. And more importantly, the evidence supports you. A woman having a breakdown doesn't hire a private investigator and systematically document months of adultery. She doesn't plan a careful, safe exit strategy that prioritizes her children's well-being. As they discussed timelines and procedures, Rachel found herself thinking about the conversation she'd had with Natalie Pierce 2 days earlier. The other woman's shock had been genuine, her remorse palpable. In some twisted way, talking to Natalie had been more helpful than any of the well-meaning advice from friends who urged her to fight for her marriage or think of the children. Natalie understood something that others didn't, that David's betrayal wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a systematic construction of an alternate life that required him to lie every single day for 6 months. That level of deception wasn't something you worked through with couples counseling and renewed commitment. Mrs. Harrison? Patricia's voice brought her back to the present. I asked about your current living situation. Are you staying somewhere secure? Yes, with friends. People he doesn't know. Rachel didn't elaborate. The lake house where she and the twins were staying belonged to Maya's cousin, a place David had never heard of and couldn't find even if he tried. It was sparse but peaceful, with huge windows overlooking the water and enough space for the girls to play safely. Good. Stability is crucial for the children during this transition, and the court will want to see that you're providing a consistent environment. After the appointment, Rachel strapped the twins into their car seats and drove to the small coffee shop where Maya was waiting with takeout containers from the deli next door. They developed a routine of meeting whenever Rachel had business in town, partly for the practical support but mostly because Maya was the only person who didn't try to convince her to reconsider her choices. How did it go? Maya asked, sliding a turkey sandwich across the small table. She thinks we have a strong case. Emergency custody should be approved within a few days. Rachel unwrapped her sandwich but didn't take a bite. Food had become fuel rather than pleasure since Christmas night. And David. Still calling everyone we know, trying to figure out where I am. Lindsay said he showed up at our parents' house last night, demanded to know if they were hiding us there. Maya's expression darkened. What did they say? Dad told him to leave or he'd call the police. Mom actually felt sorry for him. Said he looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. Do you feel sorry for him? Rachel considered the question while watching Emma bat at the toys hanging from her carrier. I feel sorry for the man I thought I married. But that man never existed. The David who's calling and pleading and showing up at my family's house, that's who he really is. Someone who thinks he can manipulate his way back into whatever he wants. Maya nodded, understanding without judgment. It was why Rachel had confided in her first, why she'd turned to her for help when everything fell apart. Maya had been through her own devastating divorce 3 years earlier, had learned the hard way that love wasn't always enough to overcome fundamental incompatibility. There's something else, Rachel said. Patricia thinks he might try to claim I kidnapped the girls, since I left without telling him where I was going. Can he do that? Technically, maybe. We're still married, so he has parental rights. But given the circumstances and the documentation we have, it's unlikely to stick. Still, it's something to be prepared for. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the post-lunch crowd thin out as people returned to their jobs and responsibilities. Rachel found herself studying other families, couples with young children, single mothers managing toddlers, fathers pushing strollers while talking on their phones. All these different ways of organizing a life, all these various definitions of what family could look like. I've been thinking about what comes next, Rachel said finally. After the legal stuff is settled, after we establish some kind of custody arrangement. I don't want to go back to Willowbrook Heights. Too many memories, too many people who will always see me as half of David and Rachel. Where would you go? Maybe somewhere smaller. A place where the girls can grow up knowing they're enough, where I can build something that belongs just to us. Rachel paused, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I want them to see what it looks like when someone chooses themselves, when someone walks away from something that diminishes them rather than staying and accepting less than they deserve. Maya smiled, the first genuine smile Rachel had seen from her in days. That sounds like the smartest thing you've said since this whole nightmare started. As they prepared to leave, Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, her heart rate spiked. David had been persistent enough to get new phones, use other people's devices, anything to try to reach her. But the message was from Natalie Pierce. Wanted you to know I'm moving to Phoenix next week. Thank you for treating me with more kindness than I deserved. I hope you and your daughters find peace. Rachel showed the message to Maya, who raised her eyebrows. The Mistress. Former Mistress. We talked a couple days ago. She's not what I expected. In what way? Rachel thought about Natalie's genuine remorse, her immediate decision to end all contact with David once she learned the truth. She's someone who got caught up in David's lies, not someone who set out to destroy a marriage. There's a difference. You're more generous than I would be. Maybe. Or maybe I just understand now that David is the common denominator in all of this destruction. He's the one who chose to build a relationship on lies, who chose to betray everyone who trusted him. As Rachel drove back to the lake house with the twins sleeping peacefully in the back seat, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, clarity about her own worth. Not as David's wife or the twins' mother or someone defined by her relationships to other people, but as Rachel, a woman capable of making hard decisions and building a life that reflected her values. The man she'd married would never have to wonder where his family had gone if he'd chosen to be present for them in the first place. The consequences he was facing weren't cruel or vindictive. They were simply the natural result of treating love like something that would always be available no matter how carelessly he handled it. For the first time since Christmas night, Rachel allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't include managing David's emotions or making excuses for his choices. It looked like freedom. David Harrison stood in his empty living room at 2 in the morning, surrounded by the debris of a life that had imploded with surgical precision. Empty whiskey bottles lined the coffee table like soldiers in formation, and his phone lay face down on the carpet where he'd thrown it after his latest failed attempt to reach Rachel's sister. The house felt like a mausoleum now, every corner echoing with the ghosts of what he'd destroyed. Emma's laugh from the baby monitor. Sophie's contented sighs during feeding time. Rachel's soft humming while she folded laundry in the evenings, creating domestic music he'd taken for granted until silence replaced it. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts, finger hovering over names of people who might help him understand where Rachel had gone. But each number brought the same bitter realization. Everyone who mattered to his wife had already chosen sides, and it wasn't his. The doorbell rang, cutting through the 2 a.m. stillness like a knife. David stumbled toward the entrance, hope flaring in his chest that maybe Rachel had returned, ready to talk, ready to let him explain. But through the peephole, he saw Tom Chen standing on the porch, his face grim in the porch light. "You look like hell," Tom said when David opened the door. "Feel worse." David's voice was hoarse from days of unanswered phone calls and sleepless nights. "What are you doing here?" "Stella sent me. She was worried when you missed the Henderson meeting this afternoon. Said your assistant told her you'd been coming in sporadically, leaving early, not returning calls." Tom stepped inside, his eyes scanning the wreckage of the living room. "Jesus. David. How long since you've eaten anything?" David couldn't remember. Food had become an abstract concept, something his body occasionally demanded but his mind couldn't focus on long enough to acquire. "I need to find them, Tom. My daughters. They need their father." "Your daughters need a father who shows up. When's the last time you did that?" The words hit David like cold water. He sank onto the couch, running his hands through unwashed hair. "I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Tom's voice rose sharply. "You systematically lied to your wife for 6 months. You missed your daughter's first Christmas to be with another woman. You built an entire alternate life while your actual life fell apart from neglect. Those aren't mistakes, David. That's sabotage. I never meant for this to happen. But you kept making choices that led here. Every hotel reservation, every lie about business trips, every night you chose someone else over your family." Tom sat heavily in the armchair across from him. "Do you even understand what you've lost?" David thought about Emma's tiny hand wrapping around his finger, the way Sophie would calm down only when he sang off-key lullabies. The weight of their small bodies against his chest during rare quiet moments when he'd been fully present instead of mentally planning his next escape. "I love them," he said quietly. "Love isn't a feeling, David. It's a series of choices. And you've been choosing everything except them for months. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept that I'll never see my daughters again?" Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. "You're supposed to figure out why you destroyed your family before you try to get any of it back. You're supposed to stop thinking about what you want and start thinking about what they need. They need their father. They need a father worth having. Right now, you're just the guy who broke their mother's heart and abandoned them for someone else." The brutality of the words sent David to his feet, pacing the length of the living room like a caged animal. Through the windows, he could see the Harrison family mailbox, painted cheerful yellow by Rachel when they'd first moved in. She'd wanted everything to feel welcoming, optimistic. Now it just looked like a monument to naive hope. "Rachel won't even talk to me," David said. "I've tried calling her friends, her family. They act like I'm some kind of monster." "Aren't you?" Tom's question was quiet but devastating. From their perspective, you're the man who spent 6 months lying to someone who trusted you completely, who chose infidelity over intimacy, who walked away from 2 babies to play house with someone else. David stopped pacing. "I never walked away from Emma and Sophie." "You absolutely did. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, mentally. You checked out of their lives the moment you started building a relationship with Natalie. You can't be fully present for two different lives, David. Something always suffers. I thought I could manage both. I thought. You thought you could have everything without consequences. You thought Rachel would just keep being the perfect wife and mother while you got your excitement somewhere else. You thought your daughters would stay babies forever, that you could catch up on being their father when it became convenient. Tom stood and walked to the mantelpiece, where family photos still lined the shelf like evidence in a trial. Rachel holding newborn Emma and Sophie in the hospital, exhausted but radiant. The twins' first bath, David's hands steady and sure as he supported their tiny bodies. Christmas morning just weeks ago, when everything had still looked perfect from the outside. She left you a note, Tom said, studying the hospital photo. What did it say? David's throat tightened. Don't look for us. And that she knew everything. About Coastal Bay, about Natalie. That I should use the time to figure out who I want to be when the lies stop working. Tom nodded slowly. Smart woman. So have you figured out who you want to be? The question hung in the air like smoke, acrid and inescapable. David looked around the house that had once felt like home and now felt like a crime scene. Every corner held reminders of the life he'd systematically dismantled through selfishness and cowardice. I want to be the man she thought she married, he said finally. I want to be the father Emma and Sophie deserve. Then stop trying to find them and start working on becoming that person. Stop making this about your pain and your loneliness and start thinking about the damage you've caused. Get therapy. Figure out why you were willing to risk everything for someone you barely knew. Understand why you chose excitement over responsibility. What if it's too late? What if she never lets me see them again? Tom moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Then you'll have to live with that. But right now, you're so focused on getting your family back that you haven't even acknowledged what you put them through. Rachel spent months not knowing why her husband was distant and distracted. She probably blamed herself, wondered what she was doing wrong. The image of Rachel doubting herself, questioning her worth while he was with Natalie, made David physically sick. He'd been so consumed with managing his double life that he'd never considered the psychological toll his deception was taking on the woman who loved him. Start there, Tom said. Start with understanding the scope of what you've destroyed. Not just your marriage, but her sense of reality. Her ability to trust her own perceptions. The security your daughters should have felt in their family. After Tom left, David found himself in the twins' nursery, sitting on the floor between their empty cribs. The mobile above Emma's bed still played its gentle melody when he wound it up, the same lullaby that had helped her sleep through her first few months of life. He pulled out his phone and opened a new note, typing slowly. Things I need to understand. Why I thought I deserved two lives while Rachel managed one alone. Why I prioritized my happiness over my family's stability. Why I was willing to risk everything for temporary excitement. How to become someone worthy of my daughter's love. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. For the first time since Christmas night, David was asking the right questions instead of demanding the wrong answers. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the world in fresh white that made everything look clean and new. But David understood now that some damage couldn't be covered over with good intentions and seasonal symbolism. Some things, once broken, required complete reconstruction from the foundation up. And that work would have to begin with him, in the silence of a house that would never again echo with his daughter's laughter unless he earned the right to hear it. The lake house felt different in the pale light of early February morning. Rachel stood at the kitchen window, watching mist rise from the water while Emma babbled contentedly in her high chair and Sophie practiced rolling over on the living room blanket. 6 weeks had passed since Christmas night, and the sharp edges of betrayal had gradually softened into something more manageable. Not acceptance, exactly, but a quiet understanding that some chapters end whether you're ready or not. The legal proceedings had moved faster than Patricia Sterling had predicted. David hadn't contested the emergency custody order, hadn't hired his own attorney to fight her requests for temporary sole custody with supervised visitation. According to Maya, who'd been monitoring his activities through mutual acquaintances, he'd simply stopped fighting. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Rachel found herself unsettled by reports that David had essentially disappeared from his normal life. He'd taken a leave of absence from the firm, stopped returning calls from friends, and spent most of his time at home or in weekly therapy sessions that Tom Chen had apparently insisted upon as a condition of their continued partnership. "You're thinking about him again," Maya said from the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She'd driven up from the city for their weekly check-in, a routine that had become as comforting as it was necessary. "Is it that obvious? You get this look. Like you're trying to solve a puzzle you don't actually want to solve." Maya handed her a mug and leaned against the counter. "What is it this time?" Rachel sipped her coffee, choosing her words carefully. "Patricia called yesterday. David's attorney, apparently he finally hired one, submitted a request for mediation. He wants to discuss visitation rights." "That's good, right? It means he's engaging with the legal process instead of trying to track you down. It also means this becomes real. Custody schedules, supervised visits, having to see him regularly and pretend we're just 2 adults making decisions about shared children instead of." Rachel trailed off, watching Emma smear banana across her tray with intense concentration. Instead of a woman whose husband spent 6 months building a life with someone else while she changed diapers and wondered why he seemed so distant, Maya finished gently. "Exactly." Maya was quiet for a moment, studying Rachel's face with the practiced attention of someone who'd learned to read her moods. "Are you afraid of seeing him?" "No. Not afraid, exactly. I'm afraid of feeling sorry for him. Tom says he looks terrible, that he's genuinely broken about what he's lost. Part of me wants to believe that means he's finally understanding the scope of what he destroyed." "And the other part?" "The other part remembers that David has always been good at performing emotions when he needs something. Remorse is just another role he can play if it gets him what he wants." Through the living room window, Rachel could see a pair of ducks paddling across the lake's surface, staying close together as they navigated the morning calm. She'd been watching them for weeks, noting how they moved in sync, how one always seemed aware of where the other was going. It was the kind of unconscious partnership she'd thought she had with David before discovering how thoroughly he'd been improvising his own script. "There's something else," Rachel said. "The mediator wants character references from both sides. People who can speak to our parenting abilities, our stability, our commitment to the children's well-being." "That shouldn't be a problem for you." "No, but it got me thinking about who David would ask. Who in his life has actually seen him be a father? Not a provider or a presence in the house, but an active, engaged parent who prioritizes his children's needs over his own convenience." Maya set down her mug, understanding immediately. "You're realizing he doesn't have anyone. He's good with them when he's focused, when he's not distracted by work or his phone or whatever else is competing for his attention. But sustained, day-to-day parenting? Being the one who gets up at 3 a.m. for feedings, who notices when they're developing new skills, who can predict their moods and needs." Rachel shook her head. "He's never done that consistently enough for anyone to witness it." "Is that your problem to solve?" The question hung between them, sharp and necessary. Rachel had spent so much of her marriage managing David's image, smoothing over his absences and making excuses for his inconsistencies. Even now, facing the dissolution of their family, some part of her wanted to protect him from the natural consequences of his choices. "No," she said finally. "It's not. If he can't find people to vouch for his parenting, that's information the court needs to have." Emma threw her sippy cup on the floor with a delighted squeal, and Rachel bent to retrieve it. As she straightened, she caught her reflection in the window, thinner than she'd been at Christmas, but stronger somehow. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes during those final months of her marriage had been replaced by something clearer, more determined. I've been thinking about moving, she said suddenly. Maya raised an eyebrow. Away from Willowbrook Heights permanently? Away from this whole area. Somewhere the girls and I can start fresh, build something that belongs just to us. Maybe North Carolina, near the mountains. I could freelance from anywhere, and the cost of living is lower. What about custody? If David has visitation rights, you can't just relocate. I know. That's what makes this complicated. Rachel picked up Emma, settling her on her hip as she paced the small kitchen. But I also can't spend the next 18 years living my life around David's convenience. The girls deserve to see their mother thriving, not just surviving. Her phone buzzed against the counter, a text from Patricia Sterling. Mediation scheduled for February 18, 2 p.m. David's attorney confirmed his attendance. Are you prepared to discuss visitation parameters? Rachel stared at the message, feeling the weight of impending confrontation. In 2 weeks, she would sit across from the man who had shared her bed and her dreams and her daily life while secretly building an escape route with someone else. They would negotiate the future of their children like business partners dividing assets, clinical and careful and utterly divorced from the love that had created those children in the first place. I should hate him, she said quietly. It would be simpler if I could just hate him completely and clearly. But when I think about Emma and Sophie, about how they light up when they see pictures of him on my phone, I want him to be someone worthy of that love. I want him to become the father they deserve, even if he could never be the husband I needed. Maya nodded, understanding the complicated terrain of loving someone's potential while protecting yourself from their reality. You can want that without sacrificing your own peace to make it happen. Can I, though? If I move away, if I make it harder for him to see them regularly, am I sabotaging their relationship with their father? Or am I protecting them from the chaos of a man who still doesn't understand what he wants? Maybe, Maya said gently, the answer depends on what he does in mediation. Whether he shows up as the man who disappeared for 6 months or as someone who's genuinely committed to earning his place in their lives. Rachel walked to the window again, watching the ducks navigate toward the shore where cattails swayed in the morning breeze. Soon, spring would arrive and transform the landscape around the lake house. New growth emerging from winter's dormancy, life continuing its persistent cycle of renewal and change. In 2 weeks, she would learn whether David Harrison was capable of his own transformation, or whether some people were destined to remain exactly who they'd always been, regardless of how much they lost in the process. The thought both terrified and liberated her in equal measure. Either way, she and her daughters would adapt and continue moving forward. They'd learned, in the quiet weeks at the lake house, that they were complete as they were. Not missing pieces of a broken family, but the foundation of something new and whole and entirely their own. The ducks reached the shore and stepped onto solid ground, shaking water from their feathers before settling into the grass. Rachel watched them with something approaching peace, understanding finally that some migrations weren't about returning home, but about finding the courage to build one in unfamiliar territory. The conference room at Sterling & Associates felt smaller than Rachel remembered, its polished table reflecting the gray February sky through tall windows. She sat beside Patricia Sterling, her hands folded carefully in her lap, watching the door where David would soon appear for their first face-to-face encounter since Christmas night. When the door opened, Rachel barely recognized the man who walked in behind his attorney. David had lost at least 20 pounds, his usually immaculate suit hanging loose on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hair, always perfectly styled, looked like he'd been running his hands through it. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd forgotten how to be comfortable in his own skin. Their eyes met briefly across the table, and Rachel saw something she'd never expected: genuine shame. Not the performative regret she'd witnessed during previous arguments, but a bone-deep understanding of loss that seemed to have hollowed him out from the inside. "Thank you all for coming," said Dr. Marion Webb, the court-appointed mediator. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades helping fractured families find workable solutions. We're here to discuss visitation arrangements for Emma and Sophie Harrison, keeping their best interests as our primary focus. David's attorney, a crisp woman named Jennifer Walsh, opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Mr. Harrison has prepared a detailed proposal for gradual reintegration with his daughters. He understands that trust needs to be rebuilt and is committed to whatever timeline ensures their emotional well-being. Patricia raised an eyebrow. That's refreshingly reasonable. What specifically is he proposing? Jennifer slid copies of a document across the table. Initial supervised visits of 2 hours, twice weekly, at a neutral location. After 30 days of consistent attendance, we'd like to request evaluation for possible unsupervised visits of 4 hours, once weekly. Rachel scanned the document, surprised by its restraint. She'd expected David to push for overnight visits, for immediate restoration of his parental rights. Instead, the proposal read like it had been written by someone who understood he was asking for privileges rather than demanding entitlements. Mr. Harrison, Dr. Webb said gently, would you like to address your availability for these visits? Your work schedule, your living situation, any factors that might affect your ability to maintain consistency. David cleared his throat, his voice rough when he spoke. I've taken a leave of absence from my firm. I'm currently in individual therapy twice weekly and have started a parenting class through the Family Services Center. My schedule is completely open to accommodate whatever arrangement works best for the children. The room fell silent. Rachel stared at him, trying to reconcile the subdued, uncertain man with the confident executive who'd kissed her goodbye on Christmas morning while mentally planning his weekend with another woman. You've taken a leave of absence? Dr. Webb asked for clarification. Yes. 6 months initially, with the possibility of transitioning to part-time work when I return. I've realized that my priorities were… David paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Completely backwards. My daughters need a father who's present, not just financially supportive. Patricia leaned forward slightly. And your therapy? What specific issues are you addressing? Jennifer started to object. Personal medical information wasn't typically part of custody discussions, but David held up a hand to stop her. I'm working on understanding why I was willing to risk my family for temporary excitement. Why I chose deception over difficult conversations. Why I convinced myself that I could maintain 2 lives without destroying both. His voice cracked slightly. I'm trying to figure out how to be someone my daughters can trust and respect when they're old enough to understand what happened. Rachel felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. This vulnerability was new, foreign from the man who'd spent their entire marriage projecting confidence and control even when he was drowning in problems of his own making. Dr. Webb made notes on her pad. Mrs. Harrison, what are your concerns about the proposed visitation schedule? Rachel looked down at the document again, buying herself time to organize her thoughts. My primary concern is consistency. David has a history of prioritizing other things when they become more interesting or convenient. I need to know that if we establish a schedule, he'll honor it completely. The girls are too young to understand why Daddy doesn't show up, but they're old enough to feel the disappointment. I understand that concern, David said quietly. And I know I've given you every reason to doubt my reliability. The only thing I can offer is my word that showing up for Emma and Sophie will be my only priority for as long as it takes to prove I've changed. Your word has been… Rachel caught herself before saying something cruel. In mediation, everything was about future solutions, not past grievances. Your word hasn't been reliable in the past. No, it hasn't. I know that. I'm hoping for the chance to rebuild that trust one visit at a time. Dr. Webb consulted her notes. I'd like to propose a modified version of the schedule. Initial visits of 90 minutes, twice weekly, with a family services supervisor present. After 6 weeks of perfect attendance, no cancellations, no rescheduling except for genuine emergencies, we can extend to 2 hours. After 3 months of consistency, we'll evaluate for short unsupervised visits. Jennifer frowned. That seems overly restrictive for a father with no history of abuse or neglect. But there is a history of abandonment of parental responsibilities, Patricia countered. Mr. Harrison missed significant portions of his daughter's first 6 months of life in favor of maintaining an extramarital relationship. The court needs to see sustained commitment before expanding access. Rachel watched David's face as the attorneys negotiated the terms of his relationship with his children. She expected to see frustration or anger at the restrictions being placed on him. Instead, she saw acceptance, even relief, as if having clear parameters made the overwhelming task of rebuilding his life feel more manageable. There's another issue, Rachel said during a brief break in the negotiation. I'm considering relocating. Not immediately, but potentially within the next year. The children and I need a fresh start, somewhere that isn't saturated with memories of our life before. David's composure cracked slightly, his face paling. How far? North Carolina, possibly. Near Asheville. It would mean visits would need to be less frequent but longer duration, or you'd need to travel to see them. I'll travel, David said immediately. Whatever it takes. I won't let geography become another excuse to fail them. Dr. Webb nodded approvingly. That kind of commitment is exactly what the court wants to see. However, Mrs. Harrison, any relocation would need to be approved through the custody arrangement, with adequate provisions for maintaining the father-child relationship. Of course. I'm not trying to keep them from their father. I'm trying to build a life where we can all heal and move forward. As the session continued, Rachel found herself studying David with new eyes. The man across from her bore little resemblance to the husband who'd lived in their house while emotionally residing elsewhere. This version of David seemed smaller, more uncertain, but also more present than she'd seen him in years. When they broke for lunch, David approached her in the hallway outside the conference room. Rachel, could we talk? Just for a minute. She hesitated, then nodded. They walked to a quiet alcove near the building's main entrance, standing awkwardly like strangers rather than two people who'd once planned a life together. I know this doesn't change anything, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I need you to know that I understand what I destroyed. Not just our marriage, but your sense of reality. Your ability to trust your own perceptions. I made you question yourself when you should have been questioning me. Rachel looked out the window at the small downtown where she'd been rebuilding her life piece by piece. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to hear it. Because Emma and Sophie deserve a father who takes responsibility for his choices instead of expecting everyone else to manage the consequences. David paused, his hands shaking slightly. And because someday, they're going to ask you why our family fell apart, and I want you to be able to tell them that their father at least tried to understand the damage he caused. The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of everything that couldn't be undone. Rachel felt tears threaten for the first time in weeks, not from sadness but from something more complicated. Recognition that the man she'd loved might have been buried somewhere inside the husband who betrayed her, finally emerging too late to save what they'd built together, but perhaps not too late to build something different for their daughters. I hope you keep showing up, David, she said finally. For them. They deserve better than we gave them these past few months. I will. I know you don't believe that yet, but I will. As they returned to the mediation, Rachel realized that her marriage to David Harrison was truly over, not just legally, but emotionally. The man sitting across from her was a stranger who happened to share her children's DNA, someone she would need to learn to co-parent with rather than love. It should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like the first honest beginning they'd had in years. 3 months later, the spring afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Bright Beginnings Child Development Center, casting gentle shadows across the play area where Emma and Sophie sat with blocks scattered around them. Rachel watched from a nearby chair as David knelt on the carpeted floor, patiently helping Emma stack colorful rings while Sophie crawled between them, babbling contentedly. These supervised visits had become routine now, Every Tuesday and Friday at 2 p.m., 90 minutes of carefully observed interaction that had evolved from stilted awkwardness into something approaching natural connection. David had missed exactly 0 appointments, arriving early each time with a quiet determination that had gradually worn down Rachel's skepticism. "He's different," said Karen Morrison, the family services supervisor who'd been observing their visits since February. She spoke quietly from her position near the window, making notes on her clipboard. "More present, more attuned to their cues. Whatever work he's doing in therapy seems to be helping." Rachel nodded, watching David gently redirect Sophie when she tried to put a block in her mouth. 6 months ago, he would have been checking his phone, mentally planning his next meeting, present in body but absent in attention. This version of David seemed to exist entirely in the moment, as if the 90-minute visits contained his whole world. "The parenting class instructor says he asks thoughtful questions," Karen continued. "Not about managing difficult behaviors or establishing schedules, but about emotional development, about how to build secure attachment after a disrupted start." "And the therapy?" His therapist can't share details, obviously, but she's indicated that he's doing meaningful work on understanding his patterns of avoidance and deception. She's comfortable recommending progression to unsupervised visits. The words should have felt like victory, but Rachel found herself unexpectedly anxious about the prospect of David spending time alone with the twins. Not because she feared for their safety, but because supervised visits had provided a controlled environment where his growth felt manageable, documented, safe. "Mrs. Harrison?" Karen's voice was gentle. "What are you thinking?" Rachel watched Emma clap her hands with delight as David made silly faces, his whole being focused on coaxing that giggle from his daughter. "I'm thinking about what happens when this becomes real. When there's no supervisor, no structured environment, when he has to navigate tantrums and feeding schedules and bedtime routines on his own." Those are valid concerns for any parent, especially after a period of limited contact. But that's also how parenting skills develop. Through practice, through trial and error, through learning to read your children's needs. Sophie crawled over to Rachel, pulling herself up on her mother's legs with determined concentration. At 9 months old, she was becoming more mobile and more opinionated, developing the personality that would carry her through childhood. Emma remained more cautious, preferring to observe before acting, but her vocabulary was expanding daily with words that made Rachel's heart simultaneously soar and ache. "Dada," Sophie said clearly, pointing toward David. "Dada." The word hit the room like a small bomb. David froze mid-laugh, his eyes filling with tears he quickly tried to hide. It was the first time either twin had called him anything recognizable as his name. "Yes, sweetheart," Rachel said softly. "That's Daddy." David looked at her across the play area, his expression a mixture of gratitude and devastation. She understood why. Hearing his daughter claim him as father was everything he'd been working toward, but it also highlighted how much time he'd lost, how many first words and first steps he'd missed while building a life with someone else. After the visit, Rachel walked David to the parking lot as they'd begun doing in recent weeks. These brief conversations had become a necessary part of their new dynamic. Updates on the twins' development, discussions about their needs, the slow construction of a co-parenting relationship that bore no resemblance to their marriage. "She said my name," David said as they reached his car. "Sophie actually knows who I am." "She's always known who you are. She just has words for it now." David leaned against his car, looking older than his 34 years, but somehow more solid than the man who disappeared into another woman's bed 6 months earlier. "Dr. Martinez thinks I'm ready for unsupervised visits. 4 hours, once a week to start." Rachel had expected this conversation. Karen had prepared her for the recommendation, had assured her that David had met every benchmark for expanded access. Still, the prospect of handing her daughters over to someone who'd so thoroughly proven his unreliability felt like stepping off a cliff. "Where would you take them?" "My house, initially. I've baby-proofed everything, set up proper cribs in the nursery. Eventually, maybe simple outings, the park, story time at the library. Nothing ambitious until we're all comfortable with the routine." The house where... Rachel stopped herself. The house where you built a fantasy life with your mistress while I raised our children alone wasn't helpful information for this conversation. I know. I've thought about that too. But it's also where they were born, where they took their first steps, where Emma learned to laugh. I don't want to erase that history just because I contaminated it with my choices. Rachel studied his face, looking for signs of the self-serving manipulation that had once been his specialty. Instead, she saw exhaustion and determination in equal measure, the look of someone who'd stopped trying to manage perceptions and started focusing on actual change. If you miss a visit, if you're even 15 minutes late without calling, this stops immediately, she said. I won't put them through the confusion of an unreliable parent. I understand. If you introduce them to anyone, friend, colleague, romantic interest, without my prior approval, this stops. There won't be anyone else. My focus is rebuilding my relationship with them, not starting new relationships with other people. And if you decide this is too hard, too inconvenient, too limiting for the life you want to live? David was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of children play on the center's playground. Then I'll tell you honestly instead of just disappearing. I owe them that much, at minimum. The conversation felt surreal, negotiating trust with someone who'd once been her closest companion, establishing boundaries with the father of her children who'd become a stranger through his own choices. But it also felt necessary, adult, focused on the twins' needs rather than their parents' wounded feelings. There's something else, Rachel said. I've made a decision about North Carolina. I'm moving at the end of the summer. I found a house near Asheville, enrolled in a master's program at UNC. The girls and I need a fresh start. David's face went carefully blank, the expression she recognized from their marriage when he was processing news he didn't want to hear. How will that affect visitation? You can have them for a full weekend once a month, plus longer visits during holidays and school breaks. Or you can move closer to us. Those are the options. I can't ask my daughters to grow up knowing their father only 12 times a year. Then figure out how to be geographically present for them. You've restructured your career once, do it again if they matter enough. The words came out harsher than Rachel intended, but she didn't apologize. David's pattern of expecting everyone else to accommodate his limitations while he changed nothing fundamental about his priorities needed to end. You're right, he said quietly. I'll look into remote work options, or transferring to a firm in North Carolina. They come first now. Everything else can be adjusted. As Rachel drove back to the lake house, she reflected on how drastically her definition of success had changed since Christmas night. 6 months ago, success would have meant saving her marriage, keeping her family intact, finding a way to forgive and move forward together. Now success looked like David showing up consistently for his daughters, like establishing boundaries that protected her peace while facilitating their relationship with their father, like building a new life that didn't require her to minimize herself to accommodate someone else's dysfunction. The twins chattered in their car seats, Sophie practicing new sounds while Emma sang fragments of songs from their music class. They were thriving in the stability Rachel had created, developing secure attachments despite the upheaval of their early months. That evening, as she gave them their baths and prepared them for bed, Rachel found herself cautiously optimistic about David's progress. Not because she believed people could completely reinvent themselves, but because she'd seen enough consistent change to trust that he might actually become the father Emma and Sophie deserved. Whether that would be enough to bridge the geographic distance she was creating remained to be seen. But for the first time since discovering his affair, Rachel felt like she was negotiating with an adult partner rather than managing a charming but unreliable child. It wasn't the family she'd planned, but it might actually work. 2 years later, the morning light streaming through the windows of Rachel's cottage in the Blue Ridge Mountains carried the crisp promise of autumn. She stood at the kitchen sink, washing breakfast dishes while watching 18-month-old Emma and Sophie play in their gated area on the back deck. Their laughter mixed with the sound of wind chimes and distant birdsong, creating the kind of peaceful symphony that had become the soundtrack of their new life. The cottage wasn't large, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a living area that flowed into the kitchen, but it was theirs. Every piece of furniture chosen by Rachel, every photo on the walls capturing moments from their life as a family of three. No ghosts of broken promises lingered in these rooms, no memories of lies told over morning coffee or betrayal hidden behind loving smiles. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from David. Flight lands at 2:30. Should I pick them up at 3, or do you need more time? Rachel smiled despite herself. This version of David, punctual, considerate, focused entirely on logistics rather than his own convenience, still surprised her sometimes. He'd relocated to Charlotte 6 months after she moved to North Carolina, taking a position with a smaller firm that allowed him to work primarily from his home office. Every other weekend, he made the 2-hour drive to spend Saturday and Sunday with the twins, returning them Sunday evening with detailed reports of their activities and any concerns he'd noticed. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few unsupervised visits had been disasters. Emma crying inconsolably when her routine was disrupted, Sophie refusing to nap in unfamiliar surroundings, David calling Rachel in panic when he couldn't figure out why both twins were melting down simultaneously. But he'd persisted, learning through trial and error to read their cues, to prioritize their needs over his own agenda, to be fully present for the messiness of actual parenting. 3 works perfectly, Rachel typed back. They're excited to see you. Emma has been practicing saying, Daddy, all week. The response came quickly, can't wait to hear it. Any updates on Sophie's ear infection? All clear as of yesterday's doctor visit. I'll send you the notes. These practical exchanges had replaced the emotional landmines that had characterized their early co-parenting attempts. David no longer tried to use visitation discussions as opportunities to rehash their relationship or probe for information about her personal life. Rachel no longer braced herself for disappointment or last-minute cancellations that never came. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Rachel opened it to find her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, holding a covered dish and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. I hope I'm not interrupting, the older woman said. But I wanted to bring you some of that apple crisp you liked, and to see if you'd heard back about the teaching position. Rachel had applied for a part-time instructor role at the local community college, a way to use her graphic design skills while building toward the master's degree she'd been completing online. The interview had gone well, but she'd learned not to count on anything until it was official. Actually, yes. They called this morning. I got it. The words felt strange in her mouth, too good to be entirely real. Mrs. Chen's face lit up. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. A fresh start in every way. A fresh start. The phrase had become Rachel's private mantra over the past 2 years, a reminder that some endings cleared space for better beginnings. Not perfect ones. She still had moments of profound loneliness, still sometimes caught herself wondering what her life would look like if David had chosen differently, but beginnings that belonged entirely to her and the daughters she was raising to believe in their own worth. After Mrs. Chen left, Rachel settled on the back deck with her laptop, working on freelance projects while the twins played. This was her favorite time of day, productive but peaceful, the kind of balanced life that had seemed impossible during the chaos of early motherhood combined with a failing marriage. At exactly 3 p.m., David's car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, Rachel watched him take a moment to compose himself before getting out, a ritual she'd noticed during previous visits. He still approached these weekends with the careful preparation of someone who understood he was earning rather than entitled to his daughter's time and affection. Emma and Sophie squealed with delight when they saw him, toddling across the deck with the unsteady enthusiasm of children who'd recently mastered walking. David scooped them up, one in each arm, his face transforming with genuine joy that no longer surprised Rachel but had once seemed impossible. "How are my girls?" he asked, settling cross-legged on the deck while they climbed over him like a playground. "Daddy missed you so much." "Dada," Emma said clearly, patting his cheek with her small hand. Sophie babbled something that might have been words or might have been pure happiness. Rachel watched from the doorway, noting how David's attention never wavered from the twins, how he let them set the pace of interaction rather than forcing affection or activity. The man who'd once checked his phone during bedtime stories now existed entirely in whatever moment his daughters created. "They've been talking about the zoo all week," Rachel said, handing him the diaper bag she'd packed. "Sophie especially loves the penguins." "Zoo it is. We'll take lots of pictures." David stood, adjusting his hold on both twins. "What time should I have them back tomorrow?" 6 is fine. They usually eat dinner around 5:30, so if you could feed them before bringing them home, that would be helpful. These logistics had become routine, but Rachel still felt a flutter of anxiety each time she watched them drive away. Not fear for their safety. David had proven himself thoroughly capable of caring for them, but the natural reluctance of a primary parent learning to share control. As the car disappeared around the bend, Rachel found herself alone for the first time in 2 weeks. The silence felt different now than it had immediately after leaving David. Then, quiet had meant the absence of tension, the relief of no longer wondering what lies were being told or what betrayals were being planned. Now it simply meant space, room to breathe, to think, to remember who she was outside of her role as a mother. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts, pausing at a name she'd been thinking about for weeks. Marcus Rivera, a professor from her master's program who'd asked her to coffee after their last video conference. He was kind, intellectually curious, and refreshingly direct in his communication, qualities that felt revolutionary after years of navigating David's carefully crafted presentations of truth. Before she could talk herself out of it, Rachel typed a message. "Hi Marcus. I'm free this weekend if you'd still like to get that coffee. I'd enjoy continuing our conversation about sustainable design practices." The response came within minutes. "Absolutely. There's a great place in downtown Asheville, Remedy Coffee. Tomorrow at 10? Perfect. See you then." Rachel set the phone down and walked through her cottage, seeing it with fresh eyes. The home she'd built from the ashes of her marriage wasn't just a refuge anymore, it was a foundation. A place from which she could venture into new relationships and experiences without losing herself, without compromising the peace she'd fought so hard to create. That evening, she sat on her front porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. 2 years ago, she'd been a woman who'd lost everything she thought defined her. Now she was a mother raising confident daughters, a successful professional building her own career, a woman learning to trust her instincts about people and relationships. Her phone buzzed with a text from David, both girls asleep. Emma ate all her dinner. Sophie tried to feed the penguins her crackers. "They're perfect, Rachel. Thank you for trusting me with them." "You've earned that trust," she replied. "Enjoy your evening together." It was the truth. David had become the father Emma and Sophie deserved, even if he'd never again be the husband Rachel needed. Their family looked nothing like what she'd imagined on their wedding day, but it worked. The girls had 2 parents who loved them, who prioritized their well-being, who were committed to showing up consistently despite the complicated history that had brought them to this arrangement. Some stories didn't end with reconciliation or perfect closure. Some ended with acceptance, with growth, with the quiet satisfaction of building something good from the pieces of something broken. As Rachel watched the last light fade behind the mountains, she felt profound gratitude not for what she'd lost, but for what she'd found in herself when everything else fell away. Tomorrow she would have coffee with someone new, someone who didn't know her as half of a failed marriage but as Rachel, whole, complete, and ready for whatever came next. Tonight, she would sleep peacefully in a home built entirely by her own choices, surrounded by the life she'd created through her own strength and determination. The woman who'd fled into the night with her babies 2 years ago had been running from betrayal. The woman sitting on this porch was walking toward possibility, one careful step at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.